My name is Alice. I'm 29 years old. And for my entire life, my brother treated me like I was just a resource he could take from. I kept telling myself he was just irresponsible. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came at his lavish 30th birthday party. He stood in front of 80 guests, raising a crystal glass, bragging about his new sports car and his endless luxury vacations. My mother beamed at him from the head table. My cousins clapped. I fought for my life in a coma. He emptied my private safe. She will never wake up anyway, he had laughed. I survived. He spent $263,200. I thought nearly losing me would change him. I was wrong. He had no idea what vault camera footage was queued up on the projector screen behind him, or that detectives were already stepping onto the hardwood floor. What happens next won't just ruin his toast. It will destroy his freedom and send him begging on his knees in front of everyone we know. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to 1 year ago, the day I finally woke up in that hospital bed. My brother, Julian, has always lived life like the world owed him a front row seat and an open tab. Growing up, our house was divided into two very different lanes. Julian was the visionary, which was my mother's way of saying he didn't like to work. I was the reliable one, which was her way of saying I was the person they called when the electricity bill was overdue. I started my own consulting business when I was 24. It wasn't glamorous. It was a lot of late nights in a cramped home office, surviving on lukewarm coffee and the fear of failure. But by 29, I had built something real. I had a healthy savings account and a reputation for being the person who got things done. Julian, on the other hand, was 30 and still finding himself. Finding himself usually involved my mother's credit card. I remember a Tuesday night about 6 months before everything went dark. I was at my desk, finishing a project for a client in London. It was 11:00 p.m. My back ached and my eyes felt like they were full of sand. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was my mother. "Alice, Julian is in a bit of a spot," she started. She didn't even say hello. "He tried to launch that lifestyle brand and the lease on his studio is 3 months behind. It's only $6,000. You've been doing so well lately. It would be a drop in the bucket for you." "Mom, I'm working," I said, rubbing my temples. "And Julian has had 3 startups this year. I'm not a bank." "He's your brother, Alice. He has a big soul. He just isn't built for the grind like you are. You're strong. He needs a little help to get his feet under him." That was the family script. I was strong, so I had to carry the weight. Julian was special, so he got to fly. I told her no, and she hung up without saying goodbye. 10 minutes later, Julian texted me a photo of a luxury watch he'd seen. "Thinking of getting this when the brand takes off. Would look killer at the club, right?" He didn't mention the $6,000. He didn't mention the rent. He lived in a fantasy world where the money just appeared, and for years our mother made sure it did, usually by guilt-tripping me. I decided then that I needed a real safety net, not just a bank account, but something physical. I bought a high-end private safe. It was heavy, steel-plated, and bolted into the floor of my closet. I kept my emergency cash there, my property deeds, my backup ledgers, and the codes to my secondary investment accounts. It was the only place in the world where I felt my hard work was actually safe from Julian's big soul. I remember the day I put my backup ledger in there. It was a leather-bound book where I tracked every cent I earned. I felt a sense of peace as the heavy door clicked shut. I set a complex 8-digit code. No birthdays, no anniversaries. Just numbers Julian would never guess. "What's in the box, Al?" Julian asked one afternoon. He had let himself into my apartment with the spare key my mother had given him for emergencies. He was leaning against my closet door watching me. "None of your business," I said. "You're so secretive. It's just money, right? You can't take it with you." He laughed and took a sip of his protein shake. I intend to use it while I'm here, Julian. Get out of my room. He left, but he stayed in the hallway for a long time. I could hear him pacing. I knew he was looking at the door. I knew he was thinking about the drop in the bucket my mother talked about. A month later, the pressure was at an all-time high. Julian had crashed his car, a car I'd helped him down payment on, and was demanding a new one. My mother called me 3 times a day. She cried. She said I was cold-hearted. She said Julian was depressed because his vision wasn't being realized. I was exhausted. I was working 14-hour days to block out the noise of my family. I was carrying the stress of my business, the weight of their expectations, and the constant feeling that I was being hunted by my own blood. The last thing I remember clearly was sitting at my kitchen table on a Friday night. I had a sharp, stabbing pain in my head. I thought it was just another stress headache. I reached for my water glass, but my hand wouldn't move the way I wanted it to. The room started to tilt. I tried to call 911, but the phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My vision blurred into gray. I remember thinking, I hope I locked the safe. Then there was nothing. I didn't know then that I had suffered a massive brain aneurysm. I didn't know that the doctors told my family I had a 5% chance of waking up. And I certainly didn't know that while I was lying in a sterile hospital bed with tubes in my throat, my brother wasn't praying for my recovery. He was standing in my closet with a crowbar and a heavy-duty drill. He wasn't crying. He was calculating. My mother sat in the waiting room, telling the aunts that it was a tragedy, but at least Julian was taking charge of my affairs. She gave him the keys to my life because she didn't want to deal with the paperwork. She wanted him to be the man she always pretended he was. While my brain was trying to find its way back to the light, Julian was finally realizing his vision. He was finally getting the front row seat he thought he deserved, and he was paying for it with every single drop in my bucket. The first thing I smelled when I started to wake up wasn't flowers. It was the sharp, metallic scent of industrial cleaner and the stale breath of a machine. I couldn't open my eyes. My eyelids felt like they had been sutured shut. For a long time, I just drifted in a gray fog, listening to the rhythmic hiss-click of a ventilator. I remember wondering if I was already dead and if this was what the afterlife sounded like, a mechanical heartbeat in a cold room. When I finally managed to crack my eyes open, the light was blinding. A nurse with tired eyes and a blue mask leaned over me. She didn't smile. She just let out a long breath and squeezed my hand. "Welcome back, Alice," she whispered. "You've been gone for a while." A while turned out to be 6 weeks. 6 weeks of nothingness. I had missed the change of the season. I had missed deadlines, client calls, and 34 unread emails from my landlord. My body felt like a lead weight. When I tried to sit up, the room spun so violently I threw up into a plastic basin. My muscles had wasted away, leaving me shaky and hollowed out. My mother arrived 2 hours later. She didn't rush to the bed to hug me. She stood by the window, clutching her designer handbag, looking at me like I was a complicated puzzle she didn't want to solve. "You really gave us a scare, Alice," she said. Her voice was thin. "The doctors said it was touch and go. I've been exhausted. I haven't slept a full night since it happened." "I'm sorry," I croaked. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Well, at least someone in the family is doing well," she said, her tone shifting. She walked over and smoothed the hospital blanket, but she didn't look at the IV bruises on my arms. "Julian has really stepped up. It's like your accident gave him the push he needed. He started this new investment firm. He's even talking about buying a house in the hills. He's been a rock for me, Alice, truly." I stared at her. My brother, the man who couldn't remember to pay his phone bill, was a rock. The man who had been begging me for $6,000 a month ago was now buying a house. "How?" I managed to ask. "He found some investors, I suppose. He's finally being taken seriously. He's turning 30 next month, you know. He's planning a huge celebration. He says it's a new chapter for the family. She stayed for 20 minutes. She talked about Julian's new car, a sleek white sports car that she said looked like success. She talked about the Italian leather shoes he'd bought her. She didn't ask how I was going to pay for my physical therapy. She didn't ask if I still had my business. She just kept repeating how proud she was that Julian had finally found his way. The cost of my survival started to settle in my bones. I was alive, but I was invisible. My family hadn't been waiting for me to wake up so they could have me back. They had been waiting for the crisis to pass so they could get back to celebrating the golden child. 10 days later, I was cleared to go home. I had to use a walker. Every step felt like I was wading through deep mud. My best friend, Sarah, drove me back to my apartment. She was quiet during the ride, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What is it?" I asked. "Your place," she said. "I went by to get you some clothes while you were in rehab. Alice, Julian had the keys, your mom gave them to him." When I pushed open my front door, the first thing I noticed was the smell of stale cigarettes and expensive takeout. My apartment, which I kept meticulously clean, was a wreck. There were muddy footprints on the hardwood. My office door was hanging open. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to the bedroom. I dragged my walker across the floor toward the closet. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a dull, painful thud. I opened the closet door. The coats had been pushed aside, shoved onto the floor. The safe was there. But the heavy steel door was slightly ajar. I sank to my knees, the walker clattering against the wall. I didn't need to look inside to know. I could feel the emptiness coming off the metal in waves. I reached out a trembling hand and pulled the door wide. The backup ledger was gone. The emergency cash was gone. The property deeds, the gold coins I'd collected since I was 20, the documents for my secondary accounts, everything was gone. I looked at the edges of the safe. There were deep gouges in the metal where a heavy drill had been used to bypass the locking mechanism. Someone had spent hours on this. Someone had sat in my closet, surrounded by my clothes, and methodically destroyed the only security I had while I was lying in a coma. I checked my phone. I logged into my banking app with shaking fingers. The balance was zero, not just my checking account, my savings, my business tax set aside, my emergency fund. Every single account I had linked to my primary login had been drained. $263,200. The number burned into my retinas. It wasn't just money. It was 5 years of 18-hour days. It was every vacation I didn't take. It was every meal I skipped. It was my future, my safety, and my sanity. I looked at the empty safe. There was a small, torn piece of paper at the bottom. It was a receipt from a high-end watch boutique. The date was 3 weeks ago, the same day the doctors told my mother I might never wake up. That was the first time I realized my brother didn't just want my money. He wanted my life. He had stood over my empty shell and decided that my hard work belonged to him because he was built for the front row. I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy to cry. I just sat on the floor of my ransacked closet and felt the cold steel of the safe against my back. I was broke. I was physically broken. And my family had already spent the proceeds of my death. That was the moment the Alice they knew died. The Alice who covered the bills and took the insults was gone. I looked up at the top shelf of the closet. Julian was a visionary, but he was also arrogant. He thought he knew everything about my security. He knew about the safe. He knew about the bank accounts. But he didn't know about the upgrade I'd installed 2 months before I collapsed. He didn't look high enough. I reached up, my fingers brushing against a small, black plastic housing tucked behind the crown molding. It was a lens no bigger than a shirt button. I pulled my phone back out. I didn't open the banking app this time. I opened a private, encrypted cloud server. The folder was full. Watching my life being spent by someone else is a specific kind of torture. It's not a sudden blow. It's a slow, rhythmic carving. Every time I refreshed my brother's Instagram page, a new piece of my hard work was gone. There was Julian in Ibiza, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. There he was in a boutique in Milan, draped in a coat that looked like it was spun from the very silk of my retirement fund. He looked radiant. He looked like a man who had finally arrived. I, meanwhile, was learning how to walk again. The medical bills started hitting my mailbox like a barrage of stones. Because my primary accounts were empty, my auto-pay systems failed. I received a final notice from the rehabilitation center. I received a disconnection warning from the electric company. I was sitting in my dark apartment, the one Julian had treated like a frat house, wrapped in a blanket because I was afraid to turn on the heat. The physical cost was one thing, but the social cost was widening. My mother organized a Sunday dinner at her house to celebrate my recovery, but it quickly became a showcase for Julian's new life. I pulled up to her house in a taxi because I couldn't drive yet. Parked in the driveway was a white Lamborghini Huracan. It was blindingly bright under the streetlights, a jagged piece of ego sitting on the asphalt. That car alone represented years of my life. Inside, the house was full of cousins and family friends. The air smelled of roasting lamb and expensive perfume. "Alice, you look better," my Aunt Martha said, looking at my cane with a mixture of pity and distaste. Before I could answer, she turned toward the living room. "Did you see Julian's new car? He told us he made a killing on some short-term tech investments while you were away. Such a brilliant mind, that boy." I sat at the dinner table, my hands shaking. Julian sat at the head next to my mother. He was wearing a gold watch that caught the light every time he moved his hand. "It's all about timing," Julian was saying to a group of my younger cousins. "Most people are too scared to take the leap. They play it safe. They work their little jobs and save their little pennies. If you want the white car, you have to be willing to play for high stakes." He looked directly at me when he said little pennies. He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who knew the prey was too wounded to bite back. "Julian has been so generous," my mother chirped, reaching over to pat his hand. "He's paying for the entire family to go to Hawaii next month for his birthday. Business class, Alice, can you imagine? He's even helping me remodel the kitchen." "With what money, Julian?" I asked. The table went silent. The only sound was the scrape of a fork against a plate. Julian didn't blink. "I told you, Al, investments. I know it's hard for you to understand, being more of a traditional worker, but the market has been very kind to me lately." "The market," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "Alice, don't be bitter," my mother snapped. "Just because you've had a setback doesn't mean you should begrudge your brother his success. He's the one who looked after your place while you were in that coma. He's the one who made sure your mail was collected." "He certainly collected it," I said. Julian stood up, smoothing his designer shirt. "I think the medication is making you a bit paranoid, sis. Why don't you go lie down in the guest room? We don't want you overexerting yourself." The room hummed with agreement. To them, I was the sick one. I was the burden. Julian was the savior, the provider, the one holding the family's future in his manicured hands. They were all benefiting. They were getting trips to Hawaii and kitchen remodels and bragging rights. They didn't want to know where the money came from. They just wanted the wine to keep flowing. That night, after I got back to my empty, looted apartment, I found a stack of papers Julian had missed. They were tucked into the back of a junk mail pile. Bank notices. They weren't just for my primary accounts. Julian had found the codes for my secondary emergency funds, the ones I kept for my business taxes and employee health contributions. He had used the power of attorney documents my mother had signed for him while I was unconscious. He had told the bank managers I was brain dead. He had told them he was liquidating my assets to pay for my end-of-life care. He hadn't just stolen my savings. He had stolen my reputation with the IRS and my standing with my bank. He had left a trail of financial destruction that would take years to untangle. I looked at the total on the final notice, $263,200. He had drained me to the cent. He hadn't left a dollar for my physical therapy. He hadn't left a dollar for my rent. He had calculated exactly how much he could take before the accounts hit zero, and then he had walked away and bought a Lamborghini. I realized then that there was no reconciling. There was no talking it out. To Julian, I wasn't a sister. I was an inheritance he didn't want to wait for. I leaned my head against the cool glass of my office window. Below, the city lights twinkled, indifferent to the fact that I was broke and broken. But I wasn't powerless. I opened my laptop. The physical safe had been breached, but the digital one was still mine. I looked at the files from the hidden camera. I hadn't watched them yet. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to see his face while he did it. But then I thought about the white car in the driveway. I thought about my mother's new kitchen. I thought about the little pennies he mocked. I clicked play. The video was crystal clear. It was night. The light from the hallway spilled into my closet. Julian was there, sweating, holding a power drill. He was talking to someone on his cell phone, which was pinned between his ear and his shoulder. "She's not coming back, Mom," he said into the phone. The audio was sharp. "The doctor said the brain activity is minimal. We have to think about the future. It's what she would have wanted. She always said she wanted to support the family." He paused, listening. Then he laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made my skin crawl. "Don't worry about the safe. I'll get it open. She will never wake up anyway. It's basically abandoned property at this point." He pulled the trigger on the drill. The screech of metal on metal filled my speakers. I watched for 3 hours. I watched him pull out my ledgers. I watched him count my emergency cash with a grin. I watched him find the deeds and the account numbers. He didn't look guilty. He looked like he'd won the lottery. I closed the laptop. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was cold. It was steady. Julian wanted a birthday party. He wanted the world to see his success. He wanted to be the center of the room. I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. The rot didn't stay inside the family house. It started to leak into every corner of my life. By the 3rd week after my discharge, I realized my professional reputation was being dismantled. I had built my consulting business on being the person who never missed a deadline and always had the answers. But while I was in a coma, Julian hadn't just ignored my business. He had actively meddled with it. I finally managed to get my business email back after a grueling 3-hour security verification process. When the inbox loaded, I felt sick. There were dozens of threads where Julian had responded to my long-term clients. "Alice is going through a bit of a mental crisis," he'd written to a firm I'd worked with for 3 years. "She's not really herself. We're liquidating her assets to get her into a specialized facility. Don't expect her back." He hadn't just told them I was sick. He'd made it sound like I'd lost my mind. He was clearing the field so no one would come looking for the money he was funneling out of my accounts. 2 of my biggest contracts had been terminated. They didn't want the drama of a lead consultant in a specialized facility. A few nights later, my mother hosted a pre-birthday cocktail hour for Julian's inner circle. She insisted I come, saying it would normalize my presence back in society. I didn't want to go, but I needed to see who was in that room. I needed to see who was helping him spend my life. The venue was a rooftop bar downtown. The wind was sharp, and I was still leaning heavily on my cane. When I walked in, the music was loud, vibrant, expensive-sounding house music. Julian was in the center of a huddle of guys in slim-fit suits, all of them holding gold-rimmed glasses. "There she is," Julian shouted, his voice booming over the music. He walked over and draped an arm around my shoulders, squeezing just a little too hard. "The miracle girl, looking a little thin, Al, but we'll get some steak in you." He turned back to his friends. "I was telling them, guys, family is everything. When Alice went down, I didn't think twice. I stepped in, handled the messy stuff, and made sure she had a home to come back to. It's been a hell of a ride, but we're coming out on top. So generous of you, man, one of the guys said. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and skepticism. Most guys would have just let the state handle it. Julian really went to bat for you, Alice. I looked at the guy's wrist. He was wearing a watch that looked remarkably like the one Julian had been eyeing in my closet months ago. Is that right? I said, my voice steady. And how exactly did you handle the messy stuff, Julian? Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. I did what had to be done. Let's not bore the guests with logistics. Why don't you go grab a mocktail? You look a little flushed. My mother appeared beside us, beaming. She was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet. I knew exactly whose little pennies had paid for it. Alice, honey, Julian just offered to give you a small loan to help with your medical bills, she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Isn't that wonderful? After everything he's achieved this month, he's still thinking of his sister. He's even offered to let you stay in his new guest house once he closes on the property. A few people nearby actually clapped. Julian looked like a saint. I looked like a charity case, the broken sister who couldn't manage her own life, being propped up by the benevolent, successful brother. He was using my stolen money to buy the one thing I had that he never did, respect. He was buying a version of himself that was competent and kind, and he was using the evidence of his crime to fund the PR campaign. The social trap was closing. If I screamed, he robbed me. Right there, I would look exactly like the unstable person Julian had described in those emails. I was the one with the brain injury. I was the one with the cane. He was the one with the white car and the business class tickets to Hawaii. Who would the room believe? The woman who couldn't walk a straight line, or the man who was buying everyone's drinks? I felt a wave of vertigo, but I didn't reach for Julian's arm. I gripped my cane until my knuckles turned white. I don't need a loan, Julian, I said. Now, Alice, don't be proud, he said, laughing. He looked at the crowd. She's always been the stubborn one. It's okay, sis, the offer stands. I've got enough for both of us now. He clinked his glass against my cane. The sound of crystal hitting wood was sharp and ugly. I left the party 20 minutes later. As I waited for my ride on the sidewalk, I looked up at the rooftop. I could see the silhouette of my brother, his hands thrown out wide as he told another story. He was the king of the world, and he had built his throne out of my medical records and empty bank statements. The story was becoming bigger than a family feud. It was a total erasure of my existence. If I didn't act soon, the Alice who was a successful business owner would be completely replaced by the Alice who was a tragic footnote in Julian's success story. The invitation for his 30th birthday arrived the next morning. It was a heavy, cream-colored card with gold foil lettering. Join us for an evening of luxury as we celebrate Julian's third decade and his most successful year yet. It was being held at a historic manor house, 80 guests, black tie. A grand announcement was promised. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the card. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. The vertigo was gone. He wanted a grand announcement. He wanted a room full of witnesses to his most successful year. He was going to get exactly what he asked for. But first, I needed to make sure the evidence was as polished as his new car. I needed someone who knew the mechanics of that safe better than Julian did. I picked up the phone and searched for the name of the company that had installed the unit. I didn't need a doctor or a lawyer yet. I needed a technician. The man who came to my door didn't look like a hero. He looked like a guy who spent a lot of time in basements. His name was Marcus, a senior technician from the security firm that had manufactured my safe. He carried a heavy toolbox and wore a faded polo shirt with a logo that had seen better days. "You're the one who had the medical emergency," he said, stepping into my apartment. He didn't offer pity, just a professional nod. He looked at the mangled door of my safe and whistled low. "They used a high-torque industrial drill. Didn't even try to bypass the electronics, just brute force. They knew exactly where the locking bolts were. I think they had help, I said, thinking of how Julian always hovered when I opened it. But that's not why I called you. I need the internal footage. Marcus knelt by the safe. Most people don't even realize the Model 7 series has the internal black box lens. It's a secondary system designed for high-asset insurance claims. It doesn't just record the room, it records the interior of the safe and syncs the audio through the keypad's microphone. He pulled out a ruggedized laptop and connected a cable to a hidden port behind the safe's hinge. I stood behind him, my hands gripping my cane so hard my palms went numb. The cloud backup usually holds 30 days, Marcus explained, his fingers flying across the keys. If the thief didn't know about the secondary sync, he wouldn't have known to wipe the remote server. Let's see. Here we go. Footage from 3 weeks ago, multiple entries. He turned the screen toward me. There was my closet. It was 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. The screen was grainy but clear. Julian was there, but he wasn't alone. My mother was standing in the hallway, her face partially visible in the frame. "Are you sure about this, Julian?" Her voice came through the laptop speakers. It was tinny but unmistakable. "Mom, look at her," Julian snapped. He was holding a drill. "She's a vegetable. The business is already folding. This money is just sitting here doing nothing. If we don't take it, the hospital or the state will. Do you want her life's work to go to a billing department, or do you want it to save our family?" I don't want her to wake up and hate us," my mother whispered. "She isn't waking up," Julian said. He leaned into the drill. The screech was deafening. "And even if she does, she won't remember the codes. We'll just tell her the accounts were hacked while she was under. She'll believe you, she always does." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the hospital air. My mother hadn't just looked away. She had stood guard. She had sanctioned the theft of my life because Julian convinced her it was saving the family. To them, the family was a group that didn't include me. I was just the fuel. Marcus looked up at me, his face grim. "I've seen a lot of messy divorces and business partners robbing each other, but this is cold. You want me to download the master files?" "Everything," I said. "I want every timestamp. I want the audio enhancement. And I need a certified log of the bank account documents he pulled out of there." "I can do better," Marcus said. "I can sync the safe's entry log with your bank's digital withdrawal records. The safe records the exact second the documents were removed. If he went to the bank an hour later, it's a closed loop of evidence." For the first time since I woke up, I felt a sense of clarity. The fog of why was gone. The how was now a series of data points on a screen. Support didn't feel like a hug or a warm meal. It felt like a 64 GB flash drive being pressed into my hand. It felt like Marcus showing me how to timestamp the moment Julian laughed about me never waking up. "Will this be enough for the police?" I asked. "For $263,000. Marcus packed his tools. "This isn't just a domestic dispute anymore. This is felony grand larceny and financial elder abuse, since he used your mother's redirected power of attorney to do it. The audio alone, that never wake up line, that's intent. That shows he wasn't trying to help you, he was scavenging." After Marcus left, I sat in the dark for a long time. I played the video one more time. I watched Julian pull out my backup ledger, the one where I had handwritten my goals and my savings milestones. He tossed it aside like trash after he got the account numbers. He didn't just steal my money, he threw away my effort. I looked at the invitation to the birthday party on the counter. It was 3 days away. My mother had texted me earlier, "Julian got you a lovely dress for the party. He wants us all to look our best for the photographers." Try to be grateful, Alice. I reached for my phone. I didn't text my mother back. Instead, I called a contact Sarah had given me, a detective in the white-collar crime division who specialized in family fraud. "Detective Miller," I said when a man answered. "My name is Alice. I have a video I think you need to see, and I know exactly where the suspect will be on Saturday night." I wasn't the reliable one anymore. I wasn't the strong one who carried the weight. I was the witness. The leverage was no longer a secret I was holding. It was a weapon I was loading. The following Tuesday, I met Detective Miller in a cramped, windowless office that smelled of industrial carpet and old coffee. He was a man who looked like he'd seen every possible way one human could hurt another for $1. He didn't offer me a seat until he'd watched the first 3 minutes of the footage Marcus had retrieved. "I've seen a lot of kids steal from their parents," Miller said, leaning back in his chair. "But watching someone drill into a safe while the owner is in a coma, that's a special kind of low. The audio is what clinches it, Alice. That 'never wake up' line proves he wasn't acting as a fiduciary. He was acting as an heir to a woman who wasn't dead yet." I handed him the second flash drive. "This contains the bank records Marcus synced. It shows Julian entering the safe at 2:14 a.m. on the 14th. Then it shows him at your branch at 9:05 a.m. that same morning, using the power of attorney to move $150,000 into a new holding account in his name only. The rest of the $263,200 followed over the next 3 days." Miller nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We've already flagged the Lamborghini purchase. He bought it cash. The dealership in the hills confirmed the wire transfer came from that same holding account. This isn't a misunderstanding, Alice. This is a textbook case of felony grand larceny. The amount alone carries a mandatory minimum sentence in this state." "I don't want a quiet arrest," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that usually came when I thought about Julian. "I don't want a phone call to his lawyer. He's spent the last 2 months telling everyone I'm a mental case to cover his tracks. He's used my money to buy the respect of 80 people. I want those 80 people to see exactly what he is." Miller looked at me for a long beat. He'd seen the emails Julian sent my clients. He'd seen the medical bills I couldn't pay. He didn't tell me to be the bigger person. He didn't talk about family healing. "The 30th birthday party," Miller said. "Saturday night, the Manor House." "Yes," I said. "He's planning a grand announcement. He wants to be the king of the mountain. I just want to make sure the mountain is made of the truth." "We'll be there," Miller promised. "We have the warrant. We have the footage. But we need to be sure the evidence is presented correctly so he can't claim it's a deepfake or a prank. I'll have my tech team certify the metadata on these files. By Saturday, this won't just be a video. It'll be a legal certainty." I left the precinct and walked toward the bus stop. I didn't have my car anymore. Julian had sold it to cover my long-term care costs, though the money had actually gone toward his first-class tickets to Hawaii. As I sat on the hard plastic seat of the bus, I looked at my reflection in the window. I looked tired. The aneurysm had left a small scar near my hairline, a permanent reminder of how close I'd come to the end. But for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. The leverage was real. It wasn't just a secret I was holding onto for comfort. It was a documented, verified, and legally lethal reality. Julian had spent $263,200 of my life, but he hadn't realized that the most expensive thing in that safe wasn't the cash or the gold. It was the camera he was too arrogant to look for. I spent the rest of the week in a state of quiet, mechanical preparation. I didn't answer my mother's calls. I didn't respond to the group chat where my cousins were discussing what to wear to the event of the season. I worked with Sarah to ensure we had the right adapters for the Manor House's audiovisual system. We made it look like I was preparing a sister's tribute slideshow. "Are you sure you can do this?" Sarah asked me on Friday night. We were sitting on my floor, surrounded by cables and flash drives. "Standing in front of everyone while they watch. That." I'm not the one who should be ashamed, Sarah, I said. I spent my life building things. He spent his life waiting for me to break so he could take them. The only thing I'm doing is letting the room see what I've already lived through. The leverage was activated. The detectives were briefed. The files were backed up in 3 different locations. The white car was in the driveway and the gold watch was on Julian's wrist, but they were no longer symbols of his success. They were state's evidence. Julian thought he was throwing a party to celebrate his birth. He had no idea he was hosting the funeral for his reputation. I looked at the dress Julian had sent over. It was white, silk, and incredibly expensive. He'd even included a note, "Wear this. You need to look like you're part of a winning family." I folded the dress and put it in the trash can. I had my own clothes. I had my own truth. And by tomorrow night, I would have my life back. 3 hours before the party, I sat in front of my vanity mirror. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I wasn't the same woman who had collapsed on her kitchen floor 6 months ago. That Alice was gone, buried under hospital bills and the weight of a brother's betrayal. The woman in the mirror now was leaner, her eyes harder, and she was wearing a black dress she had bought with the last few $100s she'd scraped together from a small freelance gig. I picked up the 3 flash drives Sarah and I had prepared. They felt heavy in my palm. Each one was a copy of the same truth. One for the AV booth, one for Detective Miller, and one tucked into my clutch as a backup. This was the logistical move, the insurance policy. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. "The limo is outside your place. Don't be late, Al. Tonight is about the family legacy. Try to smile for the guests. It makes the recovery story sell better." "Legacy," I whispered to the empty room. "Right." I took a taxi instead of his limo. I wasn't going to let him control the start of my night. As the car pulled up the long, gravel driveway of the manor house, the scale of Julian's arrogance became clear. The house was illuminated by massive spotlights. Valets in gold vests were whisking away luxury SUVs and sports cars. A red carpet led to the oak double doors. My $263,200 had bought a lot of lighting and a lot of very expensive hors d'oeuvres. I stepped out of the taxi, leaning on my cane. It was my emotional move, stepping into the lion's den not as a victim, but as the architect of the collapse. "Alice, over here." My mother hurried toward me in the foyer. She was draped in a silk wrap that shimmered under the chandeliers. She looked younger, energized by the proximity to wealth. She didn't ask how my head felt or if I'd had a dizzy spell. She just adjusted my hair. "You look, well, black is a bit somber, don't you think? Julian wanted you in the white silk." "The white silk didn't fit, Mom," I said. "This suits the occasion better." "Well, just stay close. Julian is going to make his big announcement at 10. He's mentioned a sibling foundation he's starting in your honor. Isn't that beautiful? He's telling everyone it's to help people with brain injuries. It's so good for his image." I felt a surge of nausea. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was using the theft to brand himself as a philanthropist. He was using my near-death experience as a marketing tool for his investment firm. "I'm going to find the restroom," I said, pulling away from her. Instead, I headed for the ballroom. The room was packed. 80 guests, the cream of our social circle, were sipping champagne from crystal glasses. Julian was at the center of the room, naturally. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his gold watch glinting every time he gestured. He looked like the king of the world. He saw me and raised his glass. He didn't come over. He just gave me a smug, patronizing nod, as if to say, "Look what I built with your life." I moved toward the back of the room, near the technical booth where the caterers were setting up. This was the risk move. I was in a room full of people who currently worshipped him. If this went wrong, if the file corrupted or the projector failed, I would be cast out forever as the crazy, jealous sister. I would be exactly what Julian told them I was. I saw Sarah near the soundboard. She gave me a tiny, sharp nod. She had already swapped the tribute slideshow drive with the real one. The system was primed. At 9:45 p.m., I saw a movement near the entrance. Two men in dark suits stepped inside. They didn't have champagne glasses. They didn't have dates. They stood by the heavy oak doors, their eyes scanning the room with the practiced neutrality of law enforcement. Detective Miller caught my eye and looked away instantly. The countdown was in its final minutes. Julian stepped up onto the small dais at the front of the ballroom. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against his crystal glass. The sound was high and clear, cutting through the chatter like a knife. The room went silent. 80 faces turned toward him, full of expectation and reflected greed. My mother stood at the front, her hands clasped to her chest, her face glowing with reflected glory. "Friends, family, colleagues," Julian began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight is about more than just a birthday. It's about a new beginning. We've all seen how fragile life can be this year. My sister's struggle has taught us all about resilience. And it's taught me that when opportunity knocks, you don't just open the door, you build a whole new house." People chuckled. Julian beamed. "I have a surprise for you all," he continued. "A look at the journey that brought us here tonight. Alice, if you do the honors." He looked back at me and pointed. He thought I was going to trigger the slideshow of our childhood photos. He thought I was his assistant in his grand play. I reached into my clutch and gripped the remote trigger Sarah had handed me. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. I looked at my mother, who was smiling at the screen. I looked at the detectives at the door. I looked at the white car parked outside the window. "Happy birthday, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pressed the button. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The massive projector screen behind Julian hummed as it lowered from the ceiling. The 80 guests leaned forward, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the starting screen. Julian stood there, his crystal glass raised, his smile wide and confident. He was at the threshold of everything he ever wanted. And then the audio kicked in. The screen didn't show childhood photos. It didn't show a montage of Julian's investments. It showed the inside of my closet. The image was high definition, the colors crisp against the white of the ballroom wall. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the building. On the screen, the date and time were burned into the corner. 3 weeks ago, 2:14 a.m. Julian was still standing on the dais, his hand half raised with his glass. He didn't turn around at first. He just stared at the audience, his smile faltering as he saw their expressions shift from admiration to confusion, and then to a visible, physical recoiling. Then the audio hissed through the professional sound system Sarah had primed. "She's not coming back, Mom," Julian's voice echoed, sounding 3 times larger than life. "The doctor said the brain activity is minimal. We have to think about the future." The Julian on the screen leaned into the safe with a heavy-duty drill. The screech of the metal tearing open vibrated through the floorboards of the manor. Julian on the dais finally turned. His face went the color of unbaked dough. He dropped his crystal glass. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, sending shards of glass and expensive champagne skittering across the shoes of the front row guests. Nobody moved to help him. On screen, my mother walked into the frame. The room gasped. I watched her from the back. She was standing 10 feet away from the projector, her hand pressed over her mouth. She looked at her own image, the woman on the screen who was nodding as her son proposed robbing her dying daughter. I don't want her to wake up and hate us," the screen mother whispered. "She will never wake up anyway," screen Julian laughed. He pulled the heavy door open. He began grabbing stacks of cash and the leather-bound ledger. "It's basically abandoned property at this point. Turn it off." Julian suddenly screamed. He lunged toward the AV booth, but Sarah had locked the door from the inside. He pounded on the wood, his tuxedo jacket bunching at the shoulders. "It's a fake, it's AI, Alice, you crazy bitch, turn it off." He turned back to the room, his eyes wild, looking for a single face that would side with him. He found my mother. "Mom, tell them," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Tell them we were just securing her assets. We were protecting her." My mother didn't say a word. She was looking at the screen, where the video had transitioned into a split screen. On the left, the vault footage continued. On the right, a certified bank log appeared, scrolling in real time. It showed the $150,000 withdrawal at 9:05 a.m. that same morning. It showed the wire transfer to the Lamborghini dealership. It showed the sibling foundation account being opened with my tax money. The guests began to move. It wasn't a rush, it was a slow, rhythmic backing away. The huddle of investors who had been surrounding Julian moments ago disintegrated. They stepped back, their faces twisted in disgust, leaving Julian standing alone in a wide circle of empty hardwood and broken glass. "It's my money now," Julian yelled at the room. He was sweating through his shirt. "I'm the one who made it grow. She was just sitting on it like a hoarder. I'm the one who's actually doing something with it." One of our cousins, a man Julian had promised a job to just an hour earlier, spat on the floor near Julian's feet. "You robbed her while she was in a coma, man. You're a parasite." "I saved this family," Julian shrieked. I walked forward then. The tapping of my cane was the only sound in the room besides the loop of the drill on the video. I stopped 5 feet from the dais. "You didn't save anything, Julian," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in that silent room, it carried to the rafters. "You didn't even wait for my heart to stop. You were so hungry for a car and a watch that you couldn't even give me 30 days to die." "Alice, please," my mother whimpered, stepping toward me. "We can talk about this, not here, not in front of everyone." "Why not here, Mom?" I asked, looking her in the eye. "This is where the investments are. This is where the visionary lives. You stood there and watched him drill the safe. Did you think I'd never find out, or did you just hope the doctor was right about the brain activity?" She looked down at her diamond bracelet, the one I knew my money had bought. She started to unfasten it, her fingers trembling so hard she couldn't catch the clasp. Julian saw his mother crumbling and lost the last of his restraint. He jumped down from the dais and charged toward me. "You ruined everything. You were supposed to stay under. You were supposed to be the one thing that went right for me." He didn't reach me. Detective Miller and his partner stepped out from the shadows of the entrance. They didn't run. They walked with a terrifying, professional calm. "Julian Vance?" Miller asked. Julian stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at the handcuffs on Miller's belt. He looked at the 80 people who were now recording him on their phones, the very phones he'd hoped would be taking pictures of his grand announcement. I have a lawyer," Julian stammered. His arrogance was leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. "This is a civil matter, it's family business." "Grand larceny isn't a family business, son," Miller said. "And the footage we just watched constitutes a pretty clear confession of intent. Hands behind your back." Julian didn't fight. He didn't even try to run. The moment the cold steel clicked around his wrists, the king of the mountain vanished. He collapsed. He literally dropped to his knees on the hardwood, surrounded by the shards of the glass he'd dropped. "Alice, tell them," he sobbed, looking up at me. "Tell them it was a loan, I'll pay it back, I'll sell the car, I'll give it all back, just don't let them take me." I looked down at him. This was the man who had called me a mental case to my clients. This was the man who had laughed about my death. He looked small. He looked like the child who used to break my toys just to see if I'd cry. "I don't have to tell them anything, Julian," I said. "The tape already told them everything." The detectives hauled him up. As they led him through the center of the ballroom, the guests parted like a tide. There was no whispering anymore. There was just a cold, judgmental silence. Julian was sobbing, his face red and wet, his expensive tuxedo dragging on the floor. My mother followed them to the door, crying his name, but she didn't look back at me once. She was still choosing him. Even with the handcuffs on him, she was choosing the son she could enable over the daughter she had betrayed. The front doors of the manor house opened. The cool night air rushed in. I watched as the white Lamborghini in the driveway was blocked in by two police cruisers. The lights flashed red and blue, reflecting off the white paint, the color of success Julian had called it. The 80 guests began to leave. They didn't stay for the cake. They didn't stay for the music. They hurried to their cars, looking anywhere but at me. They were embarrassed. Not for me, but because they had been part of the audience. They had clapped for a thief, and they couldn't wait to wash the scent of the crime off their clothes. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom was empty. The only people left were me, Sarah, and the catering staff who were quietly clearing away the untouched food. The projector was still running, but the video had ended. It was just a blue screen now, casting a ghostly light over the room. I sat down at the head table. I picked up a silver spoon, the one Julian had used to call for attention. It was heavy and cold. I had my evidence, I had the arrest. I would get the insurance payout and the seized assets. I had won. But as I sat in the middle of that cavernous, silent room, I realized that Julian was right about one thing. Life is fragile. It can break in a second. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to hold the pieces are the ones who make sure they stay broken. I stood up, gripped my cane, and walked toward the exit. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't look at the broken glass. I just walked out into the night, toward a life that was finally, for the first time in 29 years, entirely my own. The fallout was swifter than the theft. Within 48 hours, the white car was towed from the manor driveway, seized as part of the criminal investigation. Julian's investment firm was revealed to be nothing more than a series of shell accounts used to shuffle my savings into his lifestyle. He is currently serving the first year of a 6-year sentence for grand larceny. He writes me letters from prison, alternating between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for trapping him. I don't open them. My mother sold her house to pay for his defense lawyers. She lives in a small apartment now, still telling anyone who will listen that Julian was just misunderstood and that I was too hard on him. We don't speak. Sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to stop letting the person who cut you touch it. My business is recovering. It took months of phone calls and showing the police reports to my old clients, but the ones who mattered came back. They realized that the mental crisis Julian described was actually a battle for survival. This morning, I sat on my new porch with a cup of coffee. The sun was just starting to hit the trees. My new house is smaller, but the locks are better. And in the corner of my office, there is a new safe. It doesn't hold $263,000. It holds my new deeds, my new ledgers, and a copy of that vault footage, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. I realized that the most expensive thing I lost wasn't the money. It was the illusion that blood makes you safe. It doesn't. Only the truth does. I watched a bird land on the railing, then fly away into the clear blue sky. I feel lighter than I have in years. The weight of carrying my family is gone. The silence isn't lonely, it's peaceful. If you heard your own brother say you'd never wake up while he was robbing you, could you ever look at him again? Tell me in the comments about a time a family member showed you who they really were during your hardest moment. How did you find the strength to walk away? If you want to see another story about a golden child who thought they were untouchable until a hidden camera changed everything, click the video on the screen now. And if you believe that the truth always finds a way out, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your circle small.